Good evening. My name is Karen Brandt. I'm co-chair of the Committee on Lectures, and I would like to welcome you on behalf of the Committee on Lectures, which is funded by government of the student body. Before we begin, we would like to thank tonight's sponsors, the Animal Science and National Disease Lab, the College of Design, and ISU Human Resource Services. Following the lecture, there will be a reception and book signing. Tomorrow night, Simon Winchester will speak about his book on the San Francisco earthquake here in the Sunroom. Next Monday, Brian De Silva will give a lecture in the Jardine Auditorium about peace in Sudan. The following Thursday, the ISU Republicans and Democrats will have a debate here in the Sunroom, and Senator Joseph Biden will speak on October 31st in the Sunroom. Starting off our November World Affairs series, Trudy Rubin will be speaking on Iraq, Iran, and the fight against terrorism. Ben Cohen, co-founder of Ben & Jerry's, will be speaking on November 2nd, and there may be ice cream involved. And now I would like to introduce Pam Acevoli, who will introduce our speaker.
Hi, she got my name right. Hardly anybody ever gets my name right, so that felt good. Pam Acevoli, I'm from the College of Design, and I had the opportunity today to spend a lot of time with Temple Grandin. This is my second time I've got to spend a couple of days with her. And my introduction is maybe going to be a little bit different than normal, reading what she's done. But I will tell you this, because most of you, when you came here, you know a little bit about her. But she's a professor in animal science at Colorado State University. And her autism has given her kind of a unique perspective in looking at what she does, which is designing livestock facilities. About a third of the livestock facilities in the United States and Canada have been her design. And she has the ability to visually see what the animals will see, and which makes her kind of a unique individual. But today was interesting because we went to design, we went to animal science, we went to engineering, we went to vet med, so she's got a lot to offer to a number of different people. We even spent some time talking to one young lady who came up to us and said, you know, I've always been a little bit weird. Everybody's thought I've been a little bit weird, and I've always thought I didn't fit in, and now I understand why. And so she discovered that probably she was a little bit on the autistic spectrum also. But she didn't come here to listen to me chatter on. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Temple Grandin, our speaker.
And I got to get this mic off the stand first so I can walk around. Well, it's really good to be here today. I think maybe we just start out and talk a little bit about what autism is. Autism is a continuum where it goes all the way from a brilliant scientist like Einstein, he'd be diagnosed with autism today, to somebody that remains nonverbal and very severely handicapped. And brain research has shown that there's abnormalities in what I call the interdepartmental connections in the brain. I'm a visual thinker. You know, I think in pictures, kind of like Google for images. So I like to visualize the brain as a big corporate headquarters office building. And we've got the CEO up in the top of the building at the frontal cortex. Then you have all the different departments in that building. And you have all the phone connections and email connections and computer connections that connect together what I call the interdepartmental communications. And in the normal brain, these things are very, very well connected. But in the autism brain, there's sometimes a lacking in some of these cables. And since there's not enough cables to go around, you know, you get the person that's the classic kind of nerd. That's just the mild autism, the mild Asperger's. And they might get a lot of connections in the math department or the visual thinking department. And their sales department, where all the salesmen are and the social stuff is, they don't get very many connections. Their PCs don't even get hooked up to the internet. Because there's much more interesting stuff than social. There's things like, you know, mathematics and visual thinking and all those kind of things. So much more important, so much more interesting. Now the thing is that people on the spectrum often have real uneven skills. They're going to be really good at one thing and really bad at something else. And this has helped me in my work with animals. Because if you want to understand animals, you got to get away from language. You got to totally get away from language. Now, when I was younger, I thought everybody thought in pictures. I thought everybody, when they thought about things, they could do three-dimensional virtual reality computer simulations in their head. I didn't know that other people couldn't do this until I started interviewing people about how they think. And I have a little standard interview question. Access your memory on church steeples. How does that come into your mind? Now, most people get kind of a generalized, generic one. I see specific ones. I can name off where they're at. Now, why church steeples? Well, most people, if I said, think about your own house, dog, or car, you're so familiar with that most people can visualize that. I wanted to pick something that wasn't in this room and something everybody sees, but they're a little less familiar with it. Well, I can even do a videotape. You want a wedding at the church? You want a rainstorm at the church? I can give it to you. Now, research done in Dr. Nancy Minshew's lab is showing that people with autism, people that are good at engineering and things like this, they're into details. Okay, this is called consistent. We've got a big S here made out of little s's. That's consistent. Inconsistent, you got a big S there made out of little h's. And you ask the person to either pick out the big letter or pick out the little letters. Well, the person on the spectrum tends to be faster when this is presented on a computer at picking out the little letters. Details. The normal mind that thinks in language drops the details. There's been fascinating brain scan research, Dr. Minshew's lab, that I've gotten to participate in. It's been really interesting. And details have dropped out. Another thing is that people that are visual thinkers tend to use the visual parts of the brain. This has been now discovered in brain scan machines. Use the visual parts of the brain for non-visual information. Like, for example, she had two kinds of questions. One question was addition and subtraction of both math. That would be a low visualization. Is that true or false? Or, dogs and crystals are both animals. That would be false. That would be a high visualization thing. Well, even the thing about the math, to me, is high visualization because I see my third grade classroom. Even things that most people would look at non-visually, I think about visually. Like if somebody says to me, is capitalism a good system? I start cataloging countries by how much capitalism they have, but I put pictures in each one of the categories. Even that is done visually. And in this, animals are into details. Their thinking is sensory-based. Think in pictures, think in smells, think in sounds. Whole lots and lots and lots of little details. That's where animals are at. Now, in my work with cattle handling, I was one of the first people back in the 70s to start looking at why at some feedlots or ranches the cattle very easily walk through the chutes, and in other places they don't go. Well, here's a feed yard right here is ready to tear out their facility because the cattle wouldn't go in, and all that was wrong was seeing the flag there. Because you got high contrast and you've got rapid movement. I used to get down in the chutes and see what are the animals seeing. Of course, another thing that people ask is, do cattle know they're going to get slaughtered? Well, I found they behaved exactly the same way at the meat plant as they behaved at the ranch. They were afraid of things like it's too dark, or there's something moving, or something high contrast. Here's looking down a chute at a ranch on a bright sunny day where we've got lots of shadows. Oftentimes they'll be afraid to walk over the shadows. Now, a dairy cow that's in a dairy is a trained animal. Yeah, she'll learn to walk over the shadows. But an animal that's going in there for the first time, they'll be afraid of that. Look at the people you can see through there. Maybe you just put some plywood on the side so they don't see the people. Little distractions. Here's an entrance going up to a veterinary chute on a ranch. You see it's way too dark. And look at the windmill there. And on the windy day, when that windmill is turning round and round and round, they're not going to go. Their attention will get attracted to that movement. And a calm animal will come right up there and look right at the things that it doesn't like. A scared animal, you're not going to tell, but a calm animal will look right at it. Here's another principle of animal handling. Calm animals, I don't care whether it's a dog or a cat or a horse, whatever it is, calm animals easier to handle than scared, frightened animals. It's a real basic principle of animal handling. So what's visual thinking? It's literally pictures inside your head. And what are those things in the head? That's a 16 millimeter movie reel. So I'm going to really show what generation I'm coming from. But that is pictures in the head. I've had teachers say to me, when I do talks at autism meetings, how can I get the pictures out of this student's head? You can't. That's how he thinks. I'm thinking with the part of the brain that's subconscious in most other people. Language covers up the sensory-based thinking that we share with animals. Now, oftentimes, in young autistic kids and in young dyslexic kids, oftentimes a lot of dyslexics are really great visual thinkers. You know, it's like a little bit of some of these traits, you can get some advantages. Several years ago, there was an article in Fortune magazine about dyslexic CEOs. You know, really good at running their businesses. But sometimes at age 9, some of these little autistic kids, perspective drawing will start showing up. Most 9-year-olds don't do perspective drawing. What we need to be doing is working on developing the area of strength. You know, what can the person do when they grow up in their career? Too oftentimes, even in college and high school, we're bashing away on deficits and not working on what's the strength area. What can they do for a career? You take the mild Asperger's, the ones that are happy, they're doing really neat stuff with computers or engineering or art or some other thing like that. Well, this visual thinking skill is a great asset in my equipment design job. This is a picture at the Cargill plant. In fact, in the Cargill XL beef plants, I've designed the front end, all of the animal handling facilities for all of their plants in the US and in Canada. When I draw the drawing, I can actually see the whole project in my mind. I can test run the whole entire thing in my mind, like virtual reality computing. And when I first started in my career, I actually got in some fights because I said, well, how can these other people be so stupid they didn't see it? I didn't know that most other people were not able to see it. This is one of my projects down in Brazil. It makes me happy that people in Brazil are building some of my things. Why make it curved? Cattle have a natural tendency to want to go back to where they came from. Takes advantage of that natural circling tendency. And I love this project because I like to fantasize about what the archaeologists are going to think this is for when they dig it up in the future. Obviously, of course, this part over here points towards the summer solstice. And this has great religious significance. I'll tell you what it was for. Brucellosis testing of bison. Now, I was a visual thinker. But when I started doing drawing, when I first looked at blueprints, I did not relate the pictures in my head to the drawings on the paper. This actually took time to do. And the way I learned was I got the floor plans for the Swift plant in Arizona. Great big huge meat plant. And I spent 2 days with these floor plans and the entire ground layout plan. It had the water towers, the wastewater treatment, it had everything on that. And I walked through that plant until every single line on that drawing could be related to a real thing. Like this circle was a tank. Okay, now right over there you've got a square column that holds up this building. On the drawing, that's a little square. And then after I was able to do this, then being able to draw things sort of magically just came out. But there was a long period of learning how to take the more symbolic drawing thing and getting that so it was related to the pictures I had in my mind. Okay, this is one of my basic curved cattle handling facilities. And to lay this out, you're basically drawing 3 half circles along a line. Now I have a design class where the students have to lay these out. And there's rules for laying it out. You do it with a compass and with a scale ruler. And knowing about cattle, you don't really have to know about cattle, you just have to follow the rules. I'm finding some of my students today are having more problems with this because they've never drawn with a compass. They don't know what a protractor is. They haven't been building things with their hands. And I've been noticing some very interesting things about drafting. I've been working with the meat industry for 30 years. I have drawings from every single major meat company. You know, when they're doing stockyard renovations and things like this, every single one of them. And, 10 years ago when everything switched over to the, computer systems, the old people switched over fine, no problem. But what I'm finding with some of the young people that have never built anything and they've never drawn by hand, we're getting some very strange problems with some of their drawings because they're not seeing things right. One of the things that's been learned in neuroscience is you have to feel in order to see. And until they get a virtual reality system where you can put on an electronic glove and actually feel it, I'm going to be adamant that people have to build things with their hands and they have got to draw with their hands before they do computers. I trained my assistant in drafting. We did a year on the hand board, and then we went to computer school. He draws absolutely gorgeous, beautiful CAD. And he uses a compass function and all those things in the CAD system, which he was not taught how to do at CAD school. But I made sure after he got back home, when we got back home, we went through all the little icons on the keyboard. And, okay, this is your compass, this is your protractor, this is your French curves, just like you have at hand drafting. It's a gorgeous job. Okay, and there's the actual thing. And to teach my students, I'll switch back and forth between the photo and the drawing. I found on some of my students that really helped them to relate the drawing to the actual thing. As I said before, I can't believe some of the mistakes on some of these drawings. I've got things like the center of the circle is not in the center of the circle. I got one drawing from a major hog company where they had 25-foot long gates in their stockyard. There's no way that 25-foot long gates are going to work. They simply weren't seeing it. I had another great big huge plant. Normally when you're doing cattle ramps out of concrete, you go a 3.5-inch step with a 12-inch run. Well, this engineer wanted to save on forming costs, so he went to a 6-inch rise. I was afraid the cattle would stumble on that. So I told him to change it back to the 3.5. Well, he just goes to the computer keyboard and he types in the command to change it to 3.5. But wait a minute. When you go to 3.5, to get the same rise, you got to add more steps. He didn't add more steps. Man, I really goofed up all the details. And they sent the drawings back to me and I go, wait a minute, this still is not right. Here are some of the common mistakes. They don't bother to use the compass function to see where a gate swings. Okay, when you lay out that big wide curve, it's got to be 12 foot wide going all the way around the curve. They'll lay one side out all wavy. I couldn't believe some of the mistakes. Just not seeing it at all. Now, how do you form a concept when you don't think in words? This is a picture that a young autistic man sent me to show how pictures are put in little boxes inside his head. And neuroscience research has shown that the brain makes file folders, sensory-based file folders. File folders of pictures, file folders of sounds. So when I was little, the way that I categorized dogs from cats was by size. A dog is bigger. But what happens when you get a little teensy dog that comes into the neighborhood? Then what do? Well, I remember when our neighbors got a dachshund, and I looked at the dachshund, and I looked at the dachshund, and I had to figure out why she wasn't a cat. So what I had to do is in my mind, I had to make a new file folder in my mind of some feature that every single dog, no matter how big or small, has. And every single dog, no matter how small or how weird, has got the same nose. So nose shape was the visual feature. Every dog had the same. You could do it by meowing or barking. You could also do it by smell. And there's been some real interesting experiments. There's one interesting experiment that was done with monkeys where they looked at computer-generated graphics of cat and dogs that looked like brass sculptures that would gradually turn into the other animal, and the brain would switch from cat to dog. The categories have well-defined boundaries unless you make another file folder. Well, I got into Nancy Minshew's scanner, the Tensor imaging. This is not at your local hospital. This is strictly research thing. And they put me up against sex age match control. And I found out my internet trunk lines to go back into the visual cortex were bigger than my sex age match control. And I got these back and I'm going, wow, it's a real mind blower. You know, they're starting now to actually be able to map out some of the circuits. Let's look at something else with visual thinking in animals. You can get what I call fear memories. Animals often associate something they're looking at right at the time that something bad happened with something bad. Like my assistant's little red dog is afraid of hot air balloons. A hot air balloon came up over the house, revved up the burner. She's afraid of that. Then that fear spread to red plastic balls on power lines. Then the next thing she got afraid of was tanker truck rear ends going up over the top of the hill. So it looks like she doesn't like big round things very well. But there's some other round things that are around that didn't bother her at all. Traffic lights and round ball lights at the pizza parlor. So then what I did in my mind is I put all these pictures out in my mind and I go, what's different? What's a different file folder or a different category for the pizza lights and the traffic lights than tanker truck rear ends, power line balls or balloons? And I finally figured out the file folder is round thing against the sky. Round against the sky is scary. Traffic lights in Fort Collins are against a black metal rectangle. That's not a round thing against the sky. And then the pizza lights were against a brown brick wall. You see, her fear generalized, but in a perceptually visual, very, very specific way. And then we go a little further up in the brain, and I got a great big internet line on the right-hand side. My left cortex, I got less than my sex age match control. This is stuff that's so new right now. They're just learning, what does this mean? But at least one thing, what I used to always say long before these scans were done, that in my office building, my graphic designers had like 50 high-speed internet lines. Well, my math department didn't get much for it because I'm very poor in math. But boy, my graphic designers, they got the good internet connections. And it's turning out that brain research is showing that, yeah, that's true. Okay, now you look at people that might be mildly autistic, maybe dyslexic, maybe some other learning problems. Often you have extremely uneven skills. And you know what? If you didn't have some Asperger's, you wouldn't have any electricity. Tesla, who invented the power plant, would be diagnosed autistic today. Mozart would be diagnosed with Asperger's, which is just the mild autism. Carl Sagan probably was Asperger's. I'm a visual thinker, and I think in photorealistic pictures. Absolutely horrible at algebra, because there's nothing there to visualize. And my math education was not handled well. We should have gone on to geometry. That was never done. I have a lot of ideas on how to improve my understanding of math now. See, my thinking is bottom up. You take all the little details and put them together to figure out a whole. Most other people think top down. Then there are the people in engineering, the music and math minds. These people are pattern thinkers. And I was very interested to find out today that 50% of the students in band or marching band are out of school engineering. I was really interested. Well, that's the music and math mind. Then you've got, these guys tend to be poor in English. That tends to be their weak subject. But these are only generalizations. It isn't, these are just sort of basic types. You can have other mixtures and things in between. And then you have another kind. This is the history buff. Loves history, all kinds of facts, baseball statistics, might be really great at language translation. They're like a word specialist, and they're awful at drawing. They cannot draw at all. Now, how does a pattern mind work? As a photorealistic visual thinker, I was trying to find things to illustrate pattern thinking. This praying mantis is made out of origami, extreme origami. This here is the folding pattern for making that praying mantis. I would not be good at this. This is pattern thinking. Seeing patterns and relationships between numbers. Chess would go in this category. It's a type of visual thinking, but it's a kind of a more abstract form of visual thinking. And music is all patterns. In fact, I thought this was interesting, that some scientists looking at Van Gogh's Starry Night, some physicists were looking at this, and they said that it followed these statistical model of turbulence. I mean, Van Gogh didn't know anything about physics, but somehow he's like painting this in his paintings. This underlying sort of pattern stuff. I think this sort of stuff is just fascinating, looking at how the mind works, especially the creative mind. These are some famous people here with autistic and Asperger traits. We wouldn't have any technology if we didn't have, people with these traits. In fact, Simon Baron-Cohen over in England found that there's 2.5 times as many engineers in the family history of people with autism. Think about it. The really social people didn't make the first stone spear. It was somebody sitting in a corner chipping away. Now, as a little kid, I was a child of the 50s, so I had social rules pounded into me, saying please and thank you. I also had turn taking. We played all these little board games where you had to take turns. And I'm seeing a lot more difficulties with Asperger people today because I go out in a meat plant. There's 40, 50, 60-year-old Asperger engineers. They're all over the place. Good jobs they've had for years. These same people today are doing stupid things like telling off professors, telling off bosses, and getting fired because they didn't have some of those same social rules just pounded into them. The thing is, since we're not that social, we have to learn to be social like acting in a play. It's sort of like not instinctual. There's some kind of circuits that just aren't, hooked up. But the advantage that I get is I get to do all the cool technical stuff. And one of the problems in education, especially in the high schools, is a lot of educators are not aware of all of the really neat technical things. Because you've got to get these kids interested. They're not that social, so they're going to get... What's going to make them happy in life is getting with the other nerds and the other techies and doing robotics, or if they're the word types, acting in drama club, being in band, doing all these different things that they can do a shared interest with other people. How do you teach a concept to an animal like this guide dog? Well, if you only showed him intersections that had white lines, he wouldn't know what to do with an intersection that does no white lines. So you have to show them intersections that have lights, intersections that have stop signs, lights in the middle, lights on the sides, curb cuts, no curb cuts. You got to show him all of these different kinds of intersections. And then he'll start to get an intersection concept. A common problem with nonverbal autistic kids is the mom will say, well, he knows the rule of not running across the street at home, but he runs across the street at Granny's and at school. You got to teach him at Granny's, teach him at school, teach him at the shopping mall. You got to teach him in many, many different places. Then he'll get the concept. Category formation, the beginning of concept formation. And you just put a bunch of objects down like this, and you can say to the person with autism, pick out the red things. They may do that fine. But if you ask them to make up new categories, like objects that contain plastic, objects that contain metal, objects that you wear, objects that are round, new categories. You can work with these kids and work on flexibility of, with playing games with category formation, because that's the beginning of concept formation. Some people say autistic learning is just memorization and scripting. In the beginning it is. And when I was a teenager, I was horribly teased. I was called workhorse and tape recorder because I just kept saying the same things over again, and you better believe it hurt. And the only places where I could get away from teasing was my science teacher's science lab. Let's look at things that really help people to succeed. Develop this talent area and the strength area, and mentoring. And when I went away to college, I used to go over and see a science teacher on the weekend, and we'd do all kinds of neat projects. And when I was being teased in high school, the science lab, model rocket club, I was really into that, and horseback riding were places where I could go away from teasing. Some of these smart teenagers, they need to go right from childhood to the university. Because socializing with teenagers is not a life skill I need. And teenagers are these hyper weird social beings that I just don't understand. Also, we need to be getting high school kids exposed to interesting things. How do you know what kind of interesting things it's like? Get high school kids over here involved with stuff at the university. I'm seeing too many of these smart, brilliant Asperger kids going down a special ed rut. Because unfortunately, special educators are doing a fantastic job, with the lower functioning folks. See, autism's such a broad spectrum. They know how to deal with the low functioning ones. What do you do with a brilliant Asperger? Yeah, it's just really weird. When and you've got this kid that's got terrible in English, but he needs to be going to university math, and they're making him take baby math. That's the worst thing that you can do to him. He needs to be taking university math and needs special ed in English. That's what he needs. There's a horse that was afraid of black hats. There's some idiot abused him that was wearing a black hat. But a white hat was fine. And the black hat was less scary when it was on the ground. See, that's just how specific some of these fear memories can be. A man on a horse and a man on the ground, cattle view that as two different things. It's two different pictures. They need to be trained to both. You can get a horse, you can buy a Mustang from the BLM, and ride him just fine. But he might be hard to work with on the ground because he had bad experiences with roundups of people on the ground. People on the ground, people on my back, two different things. Or you can have a horse that you can work with on the ground, but you can't ride it because it had bad things happen on its back. Here are just some examples of specific fear memories that are kind of weird. Dogs that get hit by cars are often not afraid of cars. They're afraid of the piece of road where they got hit. Or you can have a horse that got roughed up with one particular type of bit, like maybe a jointed bit, and I replace it with a solid bit. He's fine. Jointed and solid. It's a different feeling picture. You hold those two bits in your hand, they feel different. They know the voices of good and bad people. Animals are extremely sensitive to tone of voice. In fact, I didn't know until I was 50 that people had all these little secret eye signals until I read about them in a book. The only really subtle signal I picked up was tone of voice. Animals are incredibly sensitive to tone of voice. Do animals truly think? And I like the way Marion Stamp Dawkins defines thinking, or cognition. It's solving a problem under new conditions. And yes, they can think. Now, they're not going to do rocket science, they're not going to do math and physics, but they can definitely think. And she likes to define it as what thinking is not. It's not simple associative learning, like operant or classical conditioning. Click or train your dog, that's simple associative learning. It doesn't require thinking. It's also not hardwired instinctual behaviors, like a dog will do a killing bite when it kills something. That's hardwired like a little computer program, like a little play ball that a dog does. It puts its butt up in the air and puts its front end down, and it's a little sign of, let's play. Those are hardwired behaviors, and there's certain stimuli that turn that on. A dog that walks all stiff with just the end of the tail vibrating, that ain't a happy dog. That's a dog that might bite you. But if the tail and the whole butt's wiggling, then you know you've got a real happy dog. But there's more to animals than just these hardwired behaviors and operant and classical conditioning. And I can remember when I was a young student, I got to meet the great B.F. Skinner. And I said to him, if we only knew something about the brain. And he says, well, we have operant conditioning. We don't have to know anything about the brain. Well, you know what? I never believed that. Here's a crow that figured out how to bend wire to get little treats out of this glass tube. And they started out giving her straight wire, or they started out giving her bent hooks. She learned how to use them. Then they gave her straight wires, and she's really frustrated, sticking it in there, and it wouldn't work. Then one day she sticks it in a crack in a table and bends it. That's solving a problem under new conditions. This was published in the journal Science This is not coming out in the National Enquirer. This is coming out in the most reputable scientific journals that there are. Well, I think the orienting response is the beginning of thinking. What's the orienting response? Okay, an animal hears something. He goes, okay, deer hears something. Do I keep watching? Do I graze? Or do I run away? See, it's not a reflex. A decision has to be made. To graze, keep watching, or run. Now, if you put your hand on a hot stove and you jerk it off, that's just a reflex. That doesn't even go in the brain. Well, the thing is, I think with a part of the brain that's subconscious in most people. I finally figured that out after as I learned more and more neuroscience. Where did I get insight into myself? I got a lot of insight from reading accounts of other people with autism and from neuroscience. Man, I learned so much from neuroscience. Really figure out what's going on here. I can see my decision-making process. I don't have a subconscious. I'll tell you something really weird that happened when I avoided hitting an elk out on the interstate. I was driving down to the airport at 11 o'clock in the morning, second day of hunting season on a southbound lane. An elk starts to come across the northbound lane. I had maybe 2 to 3 seconds to react. And this picture comes up in my mind of a car rear-ending me. That's what would happen if I stopped. Then another picture comes up of an elk crashing through the windshield. That's what would happen if I swerved. And then another picture came up of clothes slowing down at a calculated speed, and the elk hopefully would pass by in front of me. I clicked on the last choice, but I can actually see that decision-making process. I find lots of times that people that are very language-based, they just think that's like beyond weird. They don't get it. Now, how do I think about something really abstract? When I was a little kid, I'd learned the Lord's Prayer, except I didn't know what it meant, except for the power and the glory. And this is my picture for the power and glory. I got a rainbow with an electric power tower. This projector does not show the electric power tower. I don't know. Some LCD projectors do a great job of showing it. Some don't. But there is a power tower, at the base of the rainbow, except I can see it on the computer, but I can't see it there. See, the thing is, no picture, no thought. It's just that simple. My mind is like Google for images. It's associative. Now I'm going to ask you right here with the pink Iowa State shirt, I want you to Google me. And you've got me set now on Google for images. And don't ask me something really common like house or dog. Ask me something a little more original than that. It's something that's not in this room. And I'll tell you how I think in an associative manner, in a non-linear associative manner. How about you? The black Iowa State shirt on. Clothes are in this room. I asked you to think about something that's not in this room. Hopefully, we do have clothes in this room. Now, I specifically asked you you got to Google me on something that's not in the room, because clothes, I'm going to just see what's in here. It's got to be something that's not in here. Oh, planes. I see plenty of those. I go on plenty of those. And I'm seeing an airport at Denver, and I'm seeing all the planes at all the gates. I was talking at one of the design conferences about the most stupid thing, shuttle by United. That's a really dumb thing. They went and ripped out perfectly good airplane galleys and replaced them with dresser drawers with no place to store ice. It's like just impossible for them to serve drinks out of it. So that's how I got from planes to dresser drawers. Okay, now I'm seeing my dresser at my house at home. Now I'm seeing a hotel room over at the gateway. So how do I get from airplanes to dressers to hotel rooms? Well, you see, it's associative, but there is a logic. I started seeing a whole lot of pictures of planes. I'm seeing different airports. Comes up like a series of pictures. I'm now seeing the worst flight I ever went on. And this jerk stands up in this plane in the beginning of a 4-hour flight. He starts to puke, and he pukes half the entire airplane. Well, it was like the worst flight I ever went on. I'm starting to bring up like bad airplane experiences. Emergency landing, I got to go down the slides. That was really scary. Really bumpy flights, other bad things that happened on planes. Now, there's been some very, very interesting work on looking into what explains these autistic savant skills. You get somebody that can't even read or write, but they're painting beautiful art, and it's art that looks like this. Tends to be really photorealistic. The only thing is, this picture is not from an autistic savant. It's from an Alzheimer's patient. It's a work by Dr. Bruce Miller, published in the journal Neurology. This is all referenced in Animals in Translation. And what this shows is in the normal brain, language covers up the music mind and the visual thinking mind. And in a specific type of Alzheimer's, called frontotemporal lobe dementia, the Alzheimer's goes in there, destroys the language parts of the brain, and this picture came out of a tape deck installer with no previous interest in art. Also, music talent came out of some of these patients. And then about 4 years later, Alzheimer's just trashes the whole thing. But there's this period where the language is stripped off, and in some of the patients, these sort of things appear. There's another one of these paintings. This was published in the journal Neurology. Again, this didn't come out of the National Enquirer. A really, really reputable scientific journal. Now, people that are visual thinkers are good at this hidden figure text. You look at this figure here. How many people can see that figure inside the pink and orange figure there? Okay, I'll show you where it is. See the arrow here, you can kick yourself. See, it's right there. And if you take the person and you put them in the brain scanner, and it's an autistic person that's good at this, or a visual thinker that's really, really good at this, just the visual part of the brain gets turned on. The rest of the brain's shut off. In a normal brain, language and whole piles of other interconnected offices in the office building interfere with doing this. Now I'm going to show you how you can use visual thinking, how you can use visual thinking in a much more abstract way. This is what I call visual symbol pictures. Now what I'm going to show you, I know is not a brain scan, but it's a visual symbol picture for the brain scan of the normal person. No, this is the brain scan of the autistic person. It's like a little cabin out in the wilderness surrounded by snow. Just the vision part's turned on. And this is the visual symbol picture for the brain scan of the normal person. We got so much stuff turned on here, we don't even know where the visual part is. And that reminds me to talk about interconnectedness in brain systems. Now that's a little more far-fetched. But the thing is, without pictures, I can't even think. And the thing is, when I was really young, I couldn't think very well. Because I had to load a lot of web pages up into my mind. I had to load a lot of information into my mind. So I got stuff to Google in here. Until I had stuff to Google in here, I couldn't think very well. The thing is, you hear a word, you see a word, you speak it or think about it. See how different parts of the brain are turned on? Well, the normal brain's got all these interdepartmental connections. Well, in some of the people that have some of these problems, some of the interdepartmental connections are missing, but they get extra ones maybe in some places. You know what Einstein got? He got super big internet connections to the visual part and the math department, and then they got welded together. The visual department and the math department in the brain. There's actually autopsy data now that actually shows that. Now I just want to go into some things that can cause real problems for people. And one of the big problems for a lot of people are things, auditory sensitivity problems and visual processing problems, where there's problems with how the brain processes sound and vision. This is inside the brain, it's not in the eyeball. For some people, especially when they get tired, images break up because the systems in the brain that integrate the images aren't working right. And some people have a lot of problems with fluorescent lighting, it drives them crazy, it's flickering on and off like a discotheque. And some of these sensory problems can really cause you big problems. Have problems with reading, where print will jiggle on the page. People that have this are not good at drawing. Not good at all. Sound sensitivity problems. Boy, when I was a little kid and the fire alarm went off, it was like a dentist drill down my ear. It was terrible. And you have a perfectly normal auditory threshold, but you may not be hearing hard consonant sounds very well. You're dropping out a lot of the auditory detail. Tension shifting. This is they put an electronic helmet on a normal person and an autistic person. Look at how many times the normal person's going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth between the eyes. It's attention, and the autistic is looking at the mouth. They don't hear very well, for one thing. It's attention shifting delay. A lot of dyslexics have this too. Just takes a little longer to process information. Okay, now the thing is, well, Nancy did another test on me. This was the fun one. She showed me all these weird videos in the scanner. I had no idea why she was showing me Pink Floyd, The Wall videos, airplanes flying over stuff, apples, bridges, all kinds of weird stuff like that. I'm going, where the heck did they get all these crazy videos from? I had no idea why they were doing this. It was a very clever experiment. Well, my controls like checking out all the people pictures and get turned on to that. I'm checking out all the object pictures because I was trying to find out where they got these crazy videos from. See, again, that's the problem solver. And so I was looking at the bridges, the cars, the apples, the things like that, because that gave me more information on where they got the crazy tape from. What have scientists learned? They've learned a lot of things about autism, Asperger's, dyslexia, and other things. And these sensory sensitivity problems are real. You know, things like, and the frontal cortex tends to not get used as much, but there's a lot of things that have been learned. We've already discussed a lot of it. Well, what I want to do right now, I certainly want to thank everybody for coming, and then we'll do some questions. Okay, we'll do a few questions, and then we'll do the reception and some books and things. Okay, nobody has a question? I'm going to pick somebody. Okay.
I noticed some similarities between visual thinking and autism and the visual thinking in deaf people who learn sign language, because I come from a family where I've been around deaf people, and I've wondered if you've had any experience.
Okay, the question concerned visual thinking in deaf people. If you lose a sense, other senses take over that brain system's area. There's an awful lot of cortex in the brain. Like, let's say you're blind, a third of the brain's visual cortex. Well, if you're blind, you don't end up having a third of the brain blank on the brain scan. That doesn't happen. The other senses take it over and use it. And okay, like on a blind person, the braille finger, that will take up a big piece of brain real estate that a normal person that wouldn't have. I had a blind roommate when I was in college. She was amazing on crossing busy intersections. And she was hearing auditory detail in the cars. Other people weren't hearing. And a deaf person is going to be probably noticing visual detail because they've lost the hearing. And then all the hearing parts of the brain, except for one little piece of dedicated cortex, is taken over. Because it's not blank. I'll tell you that doesn't happen. It gets used.
What kind of examples did you use before the internet? Did you talk about electricity? I mean, now the...
What I talked about, when I first started, 10 years ago, I talked about speed searching CD-ROMs because there wasn't really any internet then. Before that, I talked about libraries full of information. Libraries in my brain and going in a card catalog of my brain's library. And in Thinking in Pictures. See, Thinking in Pictures was written 10 years ago before the internet really got going. So I've got a lot of library explaining things as a library of information. And the more books you get in the library, and you can look at them up in the card catalog, then the more information that you have. Now, I think the internet and the way it works is actually a much better way to explain it. Okay, right there.
Would the Language Center in a blind autistic person be better equipped than in a visual autistic person?
Okay, the question was, would a blind autistic person have a better language center than a visual one? One of the problems you got with language and autism is they are hearing. A lot of these kids are hearing like a bad cell phone connection. They're not hearing hard consonant sounds clearly, and they're just hearing vowel sounds. Well, if you don't hear, you're not going to be able to talk. And there's starting to be some good research now on sorting some of this out. There needs to be a whole lot more research.
What do you think is with the rise in autism?
The rise in autism, the Asperger's, the mild autism, they've always been here. Always been here. I think back to when I was a child. kids in my class that would have been Asperger's today. They've always been here. Computer people, Microsoft and all those computer companies, NASA and places like that. I can't believe that Asperger people are a seat in those places. You wouldn't have any engineers without Asperger traits. Now, where I think there might be a rise is in the severe autism, regressive autism, where the child seems to be normal up to age 2 and then loses speech. That's gone up. And if there's something going on with vaccines or environmental contaminants, that's where it's going on. 70 to 80% of autism and Asperger's is genetic. It's and it's a complex trait. You're not going to find any single gene. Okay, there in the back.
That leads to my question. So do you think that there is or is not a connection to mercury, to childhood immunization, some of those kinds of things that have been talked about?
Well, you get on the whole childhood immune. First of all, they're taking a lot of the mercury out. I think there might be an autoimmune problem. We're taking and shoving an awful lot of shots into a very young baby. You might be interested to know that on a standard cattle vaccination schedule, they don't take 10 shots and shove it in the calf the minute it hits the ground. You wait until it gets a little bit older. Now, what responsible doctors, or that really know about this, are suggesting doing is spreading out and delaying some of the shots. They would never recommend not vaccinating. We don't want to go back to hospitals full of, very, very sick kids, with all these bad diseases. But spread it out and not do some of it so early. And there's starting to be some research. Eric Courchain in San Diego has been finding stuff on inflammatory stuff, abnormal inflammatory stuff going on in the brain. And there's something going on. There's been some mice that have been specially bred that have the same mercury toxicity problem. There's other places you can get mercury. Fish, there's tons of mercury around. Power plants, coal-fired power plants, they're dumping out tons of it. And there may be other contaminants, plasticizer agents, solvents, but there's something going on with its regressive type. The Asperger's, they've always been here. That hasn't gone up. Because I work in a technical field, and they're all over everywhere.
When you were younger, you had some pressure-sensitive issues, and you talked about a box that you had that comforted you, that later inspired your cattle days.
Well, when I got into being a teenager, I started having horrendous panic attacks, where it was like being in a constant state of final exam nerves all the time for no reason. Now, a lot of people on the spectrum find that pressure is calming. Deep pressure is calming. And I went out in my aunt's ranch and I watched cattle going into the squeeze chute, and I noticed that sometimes they kind of relaxed. So I went and tried out the squeeze chute. So then I built this pressure thing I could get into that was like a squeeze chute, and that helped to calm me down. See, a nervous system where there has problems often has this great over-sensory sensitivity, and pressure calms it down. Lots of exercise is also extremely helpful. Well, of course I got fixated on that and got interested in that.
Do you still have sensory issues?
I still have some sensory issues. I have problems with scratchy clothing. I have to, when I buy new jeans, I got to wash them a whole bunch of times before I can wear them. I got to get all the chemicals out of them before I can wear them. I can't have the stuff against my skin. It's now gotten to a point where it's just a nuisance. It's not debilitating. But there are people with sound sensitivity and sensitivity to fluorescent lighting where it's really debilitating. Okay?
Do you have a problem with dietary limitations of any kind?
I don't have any dietary limitations, but there are some people with a lot of different problems where going on the dairy-free, wheat-free diet really helps. And it's probably a really good idea with little kids for everybody to try that for at least a month. It works on certain people. The problem you've got is these things are very, very variable. And there's no medical tests they can do right now and go, well, we do this blood test and it shows that maybe you ought to do the diet. You just don't know. Okay, I'm going to take about 2 more questions and then we'll stop and we'll have a reception.
Could you talk about your science teacher and why that was such a blessing?
Why was my science teacher so important? When I went down to Mr. Carlock's science lab, it was a refuge away from teasing. The other students that were interested in electronics, and of course the stuff we did back then was really crude. Our idea of cool was to stretch rubber over loudspeakers and glue mirrors on it, and then it would bounce around and make a light show. This was the 60s after all. And that's some of the stuff we did in Mr. Carlock's science lab. But And then, I got kind of fixated on this cattle chute thing, and Mr. Carlock said, well, if you want to find out why that relaxes you, got to study all this science. He had me in looking up all these scientific journals, and he took that interest and used that to motivate, an interest in science. Now I had a reason to study, becoming a scientist. Before I was just a goof-around student. And I was horrified when I went to a large school district, and I found that only out of this whole school district, there were only 2 high school science teachers. We've got to get these kids interested in things. We don't have very many engineers in this country. What does China do with all the Asperger kids? They send them off to computing and engineering school. Okay, let's how about right there with a red shirt?
Do you have any skills for visual thinkers who are put in a non-visual atmosphere?
Visual thinkers put in a non-visual atmosphere. Okay, you've asked me a question that's so abstract I almost can't answer that. I'm seeing a big eye out in outer space or something. Ask me a specific problem where you've been put in a visual thinker's been put in a non-visual atmosphere.
Like when you're put into a lecture where someone just talks at you for an hour and you can't.
What's the lecture about?
Perhaps like science theories.
Science theories. Well, the thing is, I find when people are talking that I can a lot of times convert that to pictures. Now, there's some philosophical stuff that's so abstract I can't do that. Now, some students have found if they tape record the lecture and then they can play it back, several times, sometimes, that helps. But basically, there are some things, if I cannot convert it to a picture, like they talk about existentialism, philosophies, some stuff like that, I don't understand it. I've got to get back to a picture. The music and math minds, I've got to kind of convert things to patterns to understand it. And I've got a whole lot of ways I could deal with, I was terrible at physics problems. Well, what I would do now if I had to take physics is I'd go out and get I'd get 15 different physics textbooks. I'd take all the problems. Let's say we're doing something with force and mass acceleration, something like that, and I'd sit down with a tutor and figure out this problem as a pattern for this formula. And we could take all these problems, put them on spreadsheets, and then I could get to where I could recognize certain problems. I slap this formula on it. It's bottom-up thinking by putting together lots of details. And that's what I would do now, knowing what I do now with physics word problems, which I had a horrible time with. And that's how I had to get through statistics. I sat down with a tutor, and I had to make up an experiment, a concrete experiment I could understand each kind of statistical test. This is chi-square, this is one-way analysis of variance, this is regression. Then they've got all these new kind of tests like survival analysis. That's a type of statistics. Think of an experiment where survival analysis would be a better test than some other common test, more common kind of test. But it's bottom-up thinking. It's putting together lots and lots of specific examples, like piecing together a puzzle. Imagine you got a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle in a bag. You got no idea what the picture on the box is. And you start to put together the picture on the box, and you start to put the puzzle together. You get 20% of it together, you're going to have a good idea what the picture is. It's bottom-up thinking rather than top-down. Most people think top-down and tend to drop details out. I have to take all the little details and put them together to form wholes. It's bottom-up thinking. There's actually some scientific research now getting behind this. I think we'll stop right here and I'll hang around and answer questions. I'll be over at the book table and hang around and talk to people. Thank you so much for coming.